Hello there my friends, my name is Riskfish and today I'm bringing you a video on Warhammer Total War. With Warhammer 3 well into development and with news of its announcement imminent, one of the most talked about topics is which races will make it into the game for launch. And today I will be looking at how Eastern Empires could be a race, built mainly around the faction of Grand Cathay. This video does have quite a lot of information, so to make things easier, I've decided to split into several main points. Number 1. Cathay has enough official source material for an army. There was recently a statement from CA dismissing fan-made content, which some people seem to believe dismisses Cathay. However, it is actually the complete opposite. Cathay does have source material, and it isn't even in a War Master list or a White Dwarf article, it's in the most official source material of all, the Warhammer Fantasy Rulebook and Army books, which according to the Warhammer wiki amounts to at least 81 pages of information from over 28 different official sources, which is comparable to an army book. This is important because while Cathay doesn't have an official army list, these separate sources easily give enough source material to make one. Let's take a look at a few examples. In the 7th edition rulebook, it mentions how Cathayan armies have a innumerable and well disciplined main body of troops, reinforced by heavily armoured warriors. These are backed up further by exotic warriors such as warrior monks, hillmen and ornate cannon. While these descriptions may seem basic if looked at individually, if you cross-reference them with other sources you can get much more detailed accounts. In the case of the warrior monks for example, just looking at 2 old Warhammer maps reveal them to be the celestial dragon monks that inhabit the southern edge of the Mountains of Morn. The Lizardman 5th edition on the other hand reveals that basic Cathayan troops use liqueured tiger shields and crossbows. Later a comment from Yinchuan's expedition reveals that a Kroxigor skin offers better protection than the liqueured scale armour of the Emperor's own palace guard. These are just some small samples from the sources, but it does add up into a significant list of details. To summarise all the units with enough information to recreate, we have multiple bannerman variants, hillmen, terracotta automatons, monkey warriors, celestial dragon monks, palace guards, horse cavalry, kirins, jade lions, ogres with Cathayan swords, horned ogres, serpentine dragons, gold dragons, ornate cannons, cannons that fire bronze lances, and the list goes on. Then of course you could add logical weapon variants which boost the list significantly. In fact, there are enough units described that a White Dwarf team member going by the name of Dave Taylor actually recreated a Cathayan army in a White Dwarf article, and while it isn't a most fleshed out army, it proves that a Cathayan army can be created using 100% official source material. Number 2. The improvements of CA. It's often overlooked how much content Gamesworkshop has let CA add or change in the game compared to the lore. With roster expansions, creation of new units, unlawful starting positions, resizing of landmasses, swapping unit classifications, changing tabletop rules, and even creating a completely original character. This is important because CA have far more experience in historical Eastern civilizations than Games Workshop, and there are lots of units hinted in the lore that can be expanded using CA's actual historical knowledge. For example, the Empire's Hellstorm rocket battery was inspired by Cathayan fireworks, and while no equivalent unit exists in Cathay, there are historical examples of China using fireworks in war. A specific example would be when they used them to repel the Mongols in the Battle of Cathay in 1232. Likewise, Clan Eshin received its training in assassination and stealth in Cathay, and yet there is no mention of an equivalent unit or organisation. But if you look to the historical elements of China in the Qing dynasty, the emperor had a secret police force which was used to punish his enemies. Then of course we know from the use of cannons in Cathay that Cathay has access to gunpowder, and probably rifles as well due to its trade with the old world. There are also early gunpowder units in Chinese history such as fire lancers, which are distinctive from anything else in Warhammer Total War. It is worth mentioning why historical China could be used to fill in the gaps, and that is because Cathay is almost identical to Qing Dynasty China. For starters, Cathay is an alternative historical name for China used by the English during the early modern period. Not only that, but the differences between the two are so small that Chinese history can actually be used to fill in blanks in Cathay's lore. For example, there are monkey warriors in Cathay that reside in the mountains of heaven. However, this location is not shown in any map. However, you can see the real life inspiration in a Chinese map, which reveals that there is a mountain range called Tian Shan, also known as the Mountains of Heaven, in northwest China. Then you have characters such as Emperor and the Monkey King, which are based on historical and legendary figures from China. The style of armor and technology also used by the Cathayans also matches quite well to Ming and Qing dynasties, with the latter being the final imperial dynasty, just like how Cathay was ended during the end times. There is also other options to add units to Cathay. Cathayan armies are well renowned for using exotic warriors, and Cathay, according to the Dogs of War 5th edition, has a Tilean Dogs of War company under its command at Yangshan. This could be used to add some of the more eastern Dogs of War style units that won't fit into the Southern Realms faction. Number 3. The popularity of Three Kingdoms. The Chinese gaming market was worth an estimated 37 billion in 2018 and is expected to reach 42 billion by 2022, which is significantly higher than both the American and European markets. While proportionally most of this is from mobile gaming, desktop gaming as a whole is also increasing, and this can be seen in some of the most recent additions from the Total War series. Warhammer 2 sold approximately 340,000 copies in its first 5 days on sale. However, this is dwarfed by the sales of Three Kingdoms, which sold over 1 million copies in its first week, over double the amount. This is important because most of Warhammer Fantasy's fan favourites, such as the Empire and the High Elves, are already in the game. This leaves Warhammer 3 with a lack of selling points compared to the other two titles in the series. However, Cathay, which is based on China, could be a huge selling point to this audience. Three Kingdoms has also incorporated many fantasy style elements such as Dynasty Mode, in which several heroes fight off hordes of enemies with overly powerful abilities, which shows that Three Kingdoms has already made attempts to become more like Warhammer and bridge the gap between the fantasy and historical fans. Then of course we have Troy Total War, which is a straight up hybrid, enhancing history's more fantasy style elements. This makes it clear that CA are trying to bridge the gap between their two largest fan bases and bring both fan groups into one paying customer base. Then of course we have Three Kingdoms assets, which are in the same gaming engine as Warhammer Total War, meaning that CA has instant access to a large amount of relevant assets if they do want to create a Cathay faction. There are even cases of Eastern assets appearing in Warhammer Total War, such as the Eshin Triads, which are armed with Guandos, a specifically Chinese weapon, which units such as the Azir Dragons use in Three Kingdoms. Additionally, one of the most recurring problems with Three Kingdoms is the lack of variety and replayability when compared with Warhammer, so combining the two games together using a Cathayan faction fixes the biggest issues present with Three Kingdoms, while at the same time adding a major selling point to Warhammer 3. Number 4. The requirements of a launch race. The best way to work out which races could be launch races for Warhammer 3 is to look at similarities between previous launch races. Firstly, launch races are normally the largest landowning factions within their current game, which makes sense from a gameplay perspective because you don't want to have a huge world with no content in it. Grand Cathay is the largest landowning faction remaining in the Warhammer world by far. For scale, Grand Cathay is as large as the entirety of the old world by itself, and that's just the main part. Then we have the Celestial Dragon Monks, who have a territory in the southern edge of the Mountains of Morn. We have the Monkey Warriors that inhabit the Mountains of Heaven. We have the Defenders of the Grand Bastion, and then there is also a piece of land to the east of Cathay, which, while it is hinted to be under the control of Cathay, is also contested by the dreaded Wu according to the Chaos Waste maps. Then of course we have Nippon, which could be represented by Cathayan units in the same way that the Empire has represented Kislev and the Southern Realms, potentially even leading to a Lord pack based on Nippon later. Secondly, launch races tend to have a presence across all three Warhammer games, and Cathay also has that. Firstly, we have Emperor Wu's expedition to conquer Araby, which was wrecked by typhoons to the east of the Southlands. It is also mentioned that most of the survivors washed upon the beaches of the Southlands before venturing inland and disappearing. Then of course we have Yin Chuan, whose vessel was blown all the way to Lustria, which led to an epic adventure where he crossed the Isthmus of Lustria, escaped the lizardmen at Zatlan, and managed to reach Cathay again. Then we have Marienburg, which has a large number of Cathayan and Nipponese inhabitants, probably leading to a presence nearby. Thirdly, launch races are normally fan favourites, and as we have established when talking about Three Kingdoms, in the absence of any remaining fan favourites from the Warhammer universe, Cathay has the potential to attract a lot of gamers. Finally, there is the objectives of the game. In Warhammer 1, all races are tasked with the expulsion of the forces of chaos from the old world, and in Warhammer 2, control of the vortex by rituals is the objective. In Warhammer 3, Cathay has a connection to almost all possible objectives. First of all is the Grand Bastion, which is the main defence against the forces of chaos, and also keeps out the Kurgan, the Hobgoblins, and the Hung tribes as well, protecting every realm beyond from the forces of chaos. Then of course we have the trade routes. Cathay sent a huge expedition to Araby because Araby was contesting the spice trade, and most of the trade routes, including the Silk Road in particular, lead to Cathay. This sadly brings us to the end of the video. I hope I've convinced you of the viability of an Eastern Empire's race in Warhammer 3, built mainly around Grand Cathay. Hitting all the requirements of a launch race with a 100% lore-friendly army, no fan content involved, and even featuring in a White Dwarf article, it further has opportunities to be boosted by CA's own historical knowledge and the popularity of Three Kingdoms. Grand Cathay would be a huge selling point to Warhammer 3 and would be a great way to end the series. If you have any comments, leave them below, and I hope I'll see you next time.